So here I am standing next to a noisy road with a lot of construction vehicles. Why are you here, Greg? Well, just behind me over here, just north of the intersection of Willow and Copper, was the original western terminus of the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad, a little spot called El Prado, which no longer exists, but is currently inhabited by a very large estate. And well, today we're going to take a little journey along the first half of the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad, the original route, which led from this point here, northeast up to Oddberry. Now in Oddberry, the engines were changed. They went from a rod locomotive to a geared one because the second half of the journey was all winding and uphill, going into the high Sierras, terminating at a little town called Cascada, which is now known as Big Creek. But all this is well and good. But without a little bit of history to put it in context, kind of meaningless, right? Well, Los Angeles, as we know it today, never would have happened if it wasn't for the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad. Why is that? Well, back in the turn of the century, 1900 that is, Los Angeles was a small but quickly growing community. Now, in 1905, the population was estimated at around 100,000 people. But in a short period of 5 years, the population had exploded to 500,000 people. Now, with such growth comes great needs for resources. Sure, we know about the water. You've watched Sunset Boulevard. They did a good job talking about that without naming Mulholland, without calling them out. But what else did they need? Power. Of course they needed power. So, Henry Huntington, who pretty much ran a monopoly on the railroad system in Los Angeles, as well as the power, he was looking for alternatives. Now, he hooked up with a man named Eastwood, who was from the Fresno area, an engineer who had this crazy idea to harness the power of the San Joaquin River flowing powerfully down from the high Sierras into the valley. He envisioned a series of dams, reservoirs, and powerhouses which could generate power from the incredible force of that falling water. Well, Huntington hooked up with Eastwood, and the rest is history. Sure, it's a great idea. Let's build this whole hydroelectric project up in the mountains. But back then there were no roads going up there, so how would you get there? Mule? Horseback? Well, that's ridiculous. The amount of equipment and people that needed to be transported up there to do this project was unfathomable. So they did what any rational person would do. They decided to build a railroad. So in 1912, they began construction of the railroad. And I believe it was something like 57 days later only, the railroad was completed. They say that surveyors had to hustle to keep ahead of the team that was building it to survey where the next part of the track was going. If you could imagine something like that happening today, unfathomable. Unfathomable. Anyways, I mean, there's a roundabout here in town. They've been building all year and it's still not finished. 57 days to build an entire railroad. Amazing. Well, while the railroad was demolished in 1933 and all of its assets sold off and redistributed, today very little of the original line, stations, and associated infrastructure of the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad exists, unless you know where to look. And thanks to my extensive research and my good friend Dorinda, I know where to look. And I'm going to take you with me as we explore the original first half of the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad. Just behind me here, you might be able to see it. There's a little house in great state of disrepair. Why is this important? Well, this is the Lesher family ranch, and in 1933, when the assets of the SJ&E were sold off, many people in the area bought things. One item that was purchased was an original caboose, which now sits at the back of this property in the most egregious state of disrepair. There's also two other cabooses which were purchased by different parties or families, and those thankfully are in museums. One is in a museum at Toll House in its original state, preserved as is, and the other is up in Shaver Lake at Camp Edison and has been painstakingly restored to as near as new condition as possible. Now, I haven't been out in this area for quite some time, just on Copper, shy of Willow, and I mean, I can't believe what's going on out here. The developers are going crazy. This all used to be wide open farmland, and now, as you can see, there's a road here. Where'd this road come from? And beyond that, all this. Look at all this. This is definitely going to be all houses before you know it. Well, just out of sight beyond that road and field sat the El Prado Station. Its tracks shooting straight toward us. Northeast along this route and continued northeast past Copper Peak. Now, of course, we can't take that route across somebody's ranch, so we're just going to continue here on Oddberry Road, and we'll catch back up with the route just past the dump and the rifle range. This cool wooden trestle used to cross Little Dry Creek. Today we got Oddberry Road. Now this location is just outside of the first stop, Ship Ranch. Continuing east on Oddberry Road, we're following the path of the tracks and Little Dry Creek. Getting closer to Millerton Road, there's a brand new development north of the road, and the tracks would have ran parallel to us. Hanging a left here on Millerton Road brings us to someplace very special just beyond the old roadhouse. Right now, I'm standing under what would have been a trestle from the original San Joaquin Eastern Railroad crossing over Millerton Road. You can see the foundations behind me. They still exist. And even across the road here, on the other side, they still exist. This would have come right overhead. How cool is that? Back onto Oddberry Road, the tracks would have run parallel with us at this point. And we're just gonna keep on going here toward our next stop, which is Mackenzie. Just over 3 miles east of Millerton Road sat the Mackenzie Station. Today, this area is part of the Ruth Mackenzie Table Mountain Preserve, which is under the care of the Sierra Foothill Conservancy. Here, you can actually walk on a stretch of the original railroad grade. Next stop, Wellborn. Here the tracks cut north away from Oddberry Road and eventually to the east again, following the creeks toward Prather. Now there was no stop in Prather, but the tracks ran just north of here, following the creek, continuing east toward Oddberry. But first things first, while I'm here in Prather, gotta get some of that crispy, crunchy chicken. Well, Oddberry Road spits you out onto the 168, also known as Lodge Road. We're heading east. Gonna turn left here on Oddberry Road, past the Park and Ride, and past the RV park to reconnect with the original route of the SJ&E. I always like to imagine that this road on the left is a railroad and there's a train heading straight toward us. Originally, there was an adobe structure here which served many purposes, from post office to a hotel. Dorinda will let me know if that was actually it or not. So we made a U-turn and now we're heading back east down Lodge Road. At this point, the train would have been running parallel to us. Reaching SJ&E Road appropriately, hang a left. Now, this is not the original route of the train. It would have been about a 1/16 of a mile to the west of here. I read a nice little anecdote about this area, actually. It said that after the auction in 1933 and the dismantling of the railroad, all the houses in this area would have been seen having their fences actually made from railroad ties and other bits of timber from the actual railroad itself and the train cars as well. So naturally, as I drive through this area now, I'm always looking back and forth, trying to see if I can spot a fence made from original timber. Hitting Oddberry Road, we're back on the tracks again, heading north into Oddberry Station, where we would have found a giant roundhouse where they were changing the engine cars from the rod to the geared Shea and Climax locomotives. Just outside of Oddberry now, the tracks would have headed to the left here and reconnected with Oddberry Road just a short distance to the north. After driving even just this short distance, I can see why they changed to a geared locomotive back down there in Oddberry. Following Jose Basin Road to the right, Bonawin Casino. Straight ahead, another stop called Indian Mission. Now, unfortunately, just up ahead, the 2-lane ends, and I'm not going to keep going. It is paved for a bit, and then it goes into gravel. I'm not sure where the next turnaround is, so we're going to play it safe. But there's still other things to see. Back in Oddberry, I spotted this. Looks like an old water tower. I'm not sure if it's connected to the railroad, but it's still pretty cool. And across the street, Cascada. Custom cabinets. Awesome. Just next to Sierra High School on Lodge Road in Toll House, you'll find caboose number 51, under the care of the Eastern Fresno County Historical Museum, which is, strangely enough, run by the Eastern Fresno County Historical Society. The origins of the cabooses was unknown until during the recent restoration of number 50, where they found SJ&E stamped on the lumber, which leads one to believe that they just went ahead and built them themselves. Now, the cupolas weren't part of the original design. They were added at some point later, and the second window then removed. Well, the second half of this journey is extremely steep and very windy, and the reason the SJ&E was known as the crookedest railroad in the world. I sure hope you enjoyed this little walk back into history along the rails of the San Joaquin and Eastern Railroad. Boy, I sure hope we can do it again real soon. Until the next time, woo woo! All aboard for for the SJ&E. Last stop, Cascada.